How's it going, everyone? It's Venomous Stare, and I have something incredibly tragic to report. One of the pillars of the Starcraft 2 scene, Jeff iNcontroL Robinson, has died. Now, this comes via iNcontrol's Twitter, where presumably family and friends got on his page and updated his followers, and I'm just going to read you the tweet verbatim, and it's on the screen. With immense grief, we announce Jeff's unexpected passing due to sudden illness Saturday. We ask privacy as his family works to understand what happened and make arrangements. To honor Jeff or offer comfort to his family, we suggest donations to SoCal Bulldog, which he loved. If you don't know, iNcontroL loves dogs, and he has a bulldog named Barristan the Bold, named of course after Barristan Selmy from A Song of Ice and Fire. He loved those books. He was an avid A Song of Ice and Fire book fan before the show even came out. And then they go on to say, Jeff is deeply loved across other communities, and we are all working to make sure his affairs are in order as he'd want. Barristan, which like I said is his dog, is safe and in the care of his friends, and family will share words of remembrance when they are ready. Let's live today in his example of love and laughter. It's so fucking sad. It really is. Oh, God. I'm fucking sorry, guys. It's just so tragic. I gotta get through this. So if you don't know who iNcontroL is, he's a fucking pillar of the Starcraft 2 scene. Oh, God. It's Idra, Artosis, Day9, and iNcontroL are the four guys who contributed the most to the scene. And I can remember watching Starcraft in the early days. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't ever expect this to happen. He was so young. He didn't really have any health problems. He was a big, strong, burly guy. He made the national championship. He made the state championship of his high school football game and unfortunately lost. But this guy was not just, a nerd who played StarCraft. He was a guy who was really athletic and strong, and he was a top tier caster, and he also was really involved in this game called Warhammer 40K. And he actually won a really big tournament on the West Coast a few months ago in that game. I don't really know much about Warhammer, but he was really into it and apparently really good at it. But how do I know iNcontroL? I actually met him at an MLG Dallas back in the day, and I got his autograph on this Day9 shirt. You can see there, it's fucking inverted and confusing me. There's his autograph, iNcontroL, along with a few others, QXC, Liquid Hero, Maximus Black, Galsy, but that's not really the point of the video, as we're just trying to commemorate iNcontroL and all that he contributed. I don't have any notes. I didn't prepare. I just saw this news and was devastated, and I wanted to sort of just talk about what iNcontroL meant to the scene and just how tremendous he was. I remember back in the early days of StarCraft 2, iNcontroL was a pro gamer. He played Zerg in Brood War and was famous for his Ultralisk use, Lurker use. He played his style. Oh, God. Sorry, it's really hard for me to do this. He played a style called Manzerg. In which he used Lurker Hydra, and got range and defense upgrades, and would just bludgeon his opponents. He was never a Mutalisk player, didn't really like to use mutas. And in one of iNcontrol's In one of iNcontrol's most famous games, he was playing the Macro Terran, and another pillar of the scene, Dan Artosis Stemkowski. And Artosis knew that iNcontrol favored this ground Manzerg style that he pioneered and not a lot of other people used. And iNcontrol put a spire at the front of his base. No. He put a lurker den at the front of his base to show that, yeah, I'm going my normal style against Artosis. And then he hit a spire in his main base and went mutas. And Artosis was never expecting the mutas because iNcontrol, like I said, never used the mutas. And iNcontrol won the game in a really big WCG tournament match versus his friend Artosis. And they were clanmates. They were both in the media clan. Oh, God. I can't believe he's gone. But whenever I think about, in a strategy game, intentionally displaying information and then doing the thing that essentially your opponent doesn't think you're going to do, and you use the information that you displayed to deceive them, and then do the other thing to counter essentially what they were planning on you doing, that's what I think of. Out of every fucking Starcraft game I've ever seen, thousands of games, that is the example that I would always reference and think of. It's just so devastating that he's gone. He was so funny. He was a guy that... One second. iNcontroL was a guy that always brought up people around him whenever he was a caster. No matter who he was casting with, he would always improve them. Whether it be a shy European pro gamer or someone that was experienced, he would always raise them up. He was so good at sort of taking digs at people, but not in a mean way, and always just doing it in a very sort of funny, uplifting way that made everything more enjoyable. I think that, without a doubt, he's the most interesting person, or not interesting, the most funny person in the entire scene. God, it's just so awful that he's gone. I actually have this series called the Venomous Classic series, which I'm going to use as the backdrop on mute for the rest of this video. And the whole point of the series is to show off classic games, and whenever I started this series, I literally had this game in mind. I thought, like, I want to be able to show this game off for the people that didn't see this when it first happened. This was like the second ever video in the Venomous Classic series. The first ever was Idraverse Vibe. So this is just going to be the backdrop to me reminiscing about iNcontroL, but this was iNcontrol's Immortal game. Whenever you hear the phrase Immortal game, it means that it's a chess term, and it essentially means that this is the game that whenever you look back at someone's career, this perfectly represents how they played, and it's It's not necessarily their best game ever in terms of results or one-sidedness, but it's the one that you think of. And for me, this is a classic iNcontroL game. He's playing a talented macro Terran named Illusion, and it's a very scrappy back and forth game. And whenever I would watch iNcontroL, I would notice that as far as Starcraft 2 goes, he was famous for a few things. DT use and the ability to base trade effectively. He was a very scrappy player, especially on his stream. Whenever games would sort of go into this base trade scenario, iNcontroL would excel. He was very good at these sort of fly by the seat of your pants improvisation type games, and this is one of those games. And this was I've watched StarCraft for 8 years. It's my favorite game ever. And as you can tell by my freaking reaction, a lot of these pro gamers really mean a lot to me. You know, they're like a mixture of like commentators, and some of them I'm friends with, and they're like it's like a mixture of like a friend and a star athlete and a radio host dying. It's just the freaking worst. You've got to understand, iNcontroL, when I call him the pillar of the scene, I'm not doing that just because he died. That was a thought that I have had and have stated for a very long time. I remember there was this famous StarCraft talk show called State of the Game, hosted by JP McDaniel, and iNcontroL was on that show frequently, and he would always do a good job. And he was very funny and would always bring out the best in the guests. Now, iNcontroL was also on another show with DJ Wheat called Inside the Game, which he, along with Greg Edgerfields, were absolutely phenomenal on. And when I say iNcontroL brought people up, as we see a close-up there of Jeff, it wasn't just a matter of him being funny and making the cast better, or him being insightful and making the cast better. This was a guy who could pull people out of their shell. This was a guy who could take a shy pro gamer who didn't have a lot of on-camera experience and make him feel comfortable. This was a guy who would always set up his co-caster for a good punchline and allow them to excel. And this was a guy who I thought very rarely ever had an off day. I never ever muted an iNcontroL broadcast. Okay, and just for reference, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to bad manner people in this video, but a lot of times when I'm watching commentaries, I'll mute the guy if I don't like him. I'd rather watch the game on mute. I'm pretty picky about who I listen to. But iNcontroL was never like that. He was one of the best casters ever, okay? And in many ways, he's remembered by a lot of the scene as a caster, because even though he was a pro gamer in Brood War, he never really had very much success in StarCraft 2. His highest finish was a 4th place at an MLG in 2010, and iNcontrol's detractors would frequently speak ill of iNcontroL in a pejorative sense, like, yeah, he got that 4th place in that MLG, sort of in lieu of tournament results. And I remember in an interview one time iNcontroL said, people would always make fun of me for that, but I was really proud of that 4th place, as he should have been. You know, a 4th place, a 4th place, keep in mind, is a semi-final finish. You lost in the second to last round. That's impressive. And, you know, iNcontroL, he might not have had that much success as a StarCraft 2 pro gamer, but his impact on the scene can't be underestimated. Despite the fact that he didn't have gold medals in his trophy case, this was a guy who was winning on all other fronts. He was the face of EG at its peak. In 2010, the team Evil Geniuses was North American StarCraft. iNcontroL, Machine, DeMuslim, Idra, Strife Crow, Axlab, these were the guys, Huck, these were the guys who were watched heavily in the early days of StarCraft 2, what many people consider to be the game's peak. This was a time where there was a tournament every weekend, like an IM, an MLG, a big tournament every freaking weekend. Now, we have WCS Summer, WCS Winter. There's not that many big tournaments. Back in the day, every freaking weekend it was a big tournament. And in this time, there were a lot of talk shows in the StarCraft 2 scene. A ton of people streamed. Sorry, my nose is running for obvious reasons. A ton of people streamed. And iNcontroL was always at the forefront of these stream shows, these interviews. iNcontroL was the face of the StarCraft 2 scene. He was the ambassador of the StarCraft 2 scene. A funny, charismatic, convivial guy that everybody liked, who could just bring the best out of people. And we're never going to have that again. You know, iNcontroL was on State of the Game consistently. And because iNcontroL was part of the media clan, Artosis' clan of all these OGs, basically all the best North American players for Brood War, iNcontroL was friends with a lot of these guys, like really, really close personal friends. Idra, Artosis, Tasteless. If you look at if you were to just think about the 10 most influential, popular people in the StarCraft 2 scene, iNcontroL is friends with every freaking one of them. And even the less popular people, they loved him. I can't think of a single person that disliked iNcontroL. Not a single one. Even Combat X, his biggest rival and character foil, it was a rivalry that everybody really liked. It meant a lot to a lot of people. And I just now thought of this off the top because I literally read the news and fired up the recorder to get my instant thoughts, but that's what we're going to watch after this. Because Combat X, if you don't know, he was basically an antagonist. He was sort of the villain of the StarCraft 2 scene in the StarCraft 2 scene's peak. And when I say the StarCraft 2 scene's peak, don't get mad at me and say, well, the games are better than they've ever been before now, and the game is fine now. I'm not saying the game is dead. But back in a fucking time when there were tournaments every weekend, Idra was pulling 10k viewers when he fired up his stream. Stefano was pulling 10k viewers when he fired up his stream. iNcontroL was the guy doing the shows. And he was the driving force behind building the scene. If you look at his appearances on Inside the Game, on State of the Game, guest appearances on shows like Unfiltered, the Starcast podcast, and of course his hosting appearances more recently on his show with Artosis, the Pylon Show, you have a guy who's probably verbally done more for the scene than anyone. If I'm talking about not commentaries, like casting, I'm talking about shows. If you look at in terms of quality shows produced, iNcontroL is probably ranked number 1, okay? Because he was a regular on a lot of these shows. And you have guys like Idra and Artosis who were on these shows a lot, but they weren't necessarily there for all of it. You know, State of the Game, it had a period where Artosis wasn't on the show. And that was a huge disappointment because State of the Game, as many old head fans know, was like the best thing ever in terms of StarCraft 2 content. Like, it didn't get any better than old State of the Game episodes. And I've watched a lot of those episodes years later. And I really didn't get really into StarCraft until 2012. But I went back and watched old VODs of State of the Game multiple times because Idra and iNcontroL and Artosis were so great. And that's a huge part of this, is iNcontroL in many ways carried those shows. He was so good at getting Idra to give good answers and sort of ribbing Idra in like a good-natured way that almost nobody else could have done. He brought the best out of people, whether it be B-level commentators that he was stuck with, or paragons of the scene like Idra and Artosis, having iNcontroL there to sort of poke them, or, encourage them to tell stories, was just phenomenal. The guy was so good at bringing up others, and that's part of why it's so devastating to lose him. Because this is the best moment of the game, by the way. After a base trade, iNcontroL swings down, and he clears up the army at the natural. And look at that reaction. You gotta love that. That's how. Look at this. This is how iNcontroL would want to be remembered. Winning that game on a big stage. God fucking damn it, dude. It's just so fucking tragic that he's gone. I didn't have this lined up because, like I said, I just thought of it. But iNcontroL, an absolute paragon of the scene. And to say that he will be missed is an understatement. Because this is a guy who not only contributed a lot as a pro gamer and as a commentator, but even as a streamer. He had a really entertaining stream. It's hard for me to multitask right now. Okay, I'm sorry. So here we go. iNcontroL versus Combat X in the background. Combat X and iNcontroL hated each other, okay? Sorry, there's a little something on my webcam, trying to get it clear. But Combat X was a huge villain of the scene, and he would always snipe and stream cheat on iNcontroL. And even after Combat X retired and came back and cleaned up his act, iNcontroL was the one guy that Combat X would still go after in bad manner, even when he had really sort of transformed as a person. iNcontroL was the guy that Combat X never got along with, and iNcontroL really didn't like Combat X at all. And this was I'm not trying to turn this into like a Combat X video, but it's important. In the Starcraft 2 scene, people are really manner, okay? It's a game that if you're sort of like a shit talker, you really get humbled really quick. And the pro gamers were in this position where, it's a 1v1 game, you don't have allies to blame. And Starcraft has a lot of like manner and etiquette rules. It's a 1v1 game. So to like run your mouth as Combat X did, it really was seen as not kosher. And like obviously the fucking stream sniping and stream cheating was bad. So finally at one point, iNcontroL and Combat X got together and were like, look, like, I'm pretty sure iNcontroL initiated it, like, if you think you're hot shit, let's play a show match for $100. And then iNcontroL released the replay pack. And these are some of the first games I ever casted on my channel. And iNcontroL won this series. And Combat X was always pretty good at PvP. If you're saying to yourself, well, Wiley, Venomous Stare, Combat X, like, he's just some fucking shit-talking YouTuber. Combat X took a game off of partying on LAN and almost beat him in a best of 3. So to say that iNcontrol's win versus Combat X didn't mean anything is laughable. They didn't like each other. They put money on the line. They had a show match. They had a 4-year-long rivalry. And in this best of 5, iNcontroL beat him. And the only game Combat X won was on Ohana, which this game wasn't included in the replay pack, by the way. Ohana Proxy Gates. The exact same strategy that Combat tried to use against Parting in the game-deciding match for who would go to the WCG Finals, or advance in the WCG Finals, rather. And iNcontroL won this series. So, I think the Illusion game is his Immortal game. And by the way, the Illusion game, the Immortal game, that was the most I've ever reacted to a StarCraft 2 game. And I know it sounds sort of corny and hokey for people who don't really follow the scene or understand, but 99% of Starcraft 2 games, even if it's with a player I like if they win a game, like you might type GG in Twitch chat. Like, I'm not sitting there psyched up. This iNcontroL game where he came back and beat Illusion, I fucking jumped out of my chair and went and hugged my friend who I was watching it with. I was so happy for him. I remember, despite the fact that iNcontroL had pretty poor tournament results, I remember just always cheering for him. Never giving up hope. You know, iNcontroL enters an MLG Open bracket with, 20 extremely talented GSL caliber Koreans and all the top foreigners. I was still rooting for him. I didn't write him off. I was like, oh, iNcontroL, he can't win that group. It was like, no, you're still rooting for him. You're rooting for him every time. This guy was the spitting image of America. This was a guy who, not only were you happy to have representing your game, but you were happy to have represent your country. I mean, the fact that he died so young is just tragic. We're never going to get to hear. Sorry. We're never going to get to hear his infectious laugh again. We're never going to get to hear him rib Artosis again. Who's gonna joke about Artosis losing to day 9? God damn it. iNcontroL meant so much to this scene. When I say that he was a pillar of the Starcraft 2 scene, that's not an exaggeration. Even a little. This guy helped so many people, whether it be through his coaching, through his commentary, and we'll never hear from him again. I couldn't believe this news when it broke. I thought his Twitter account had been hacked. It's just puzzling to know that such a strong guy, a guy who, if you literally were to have a competition in the entire StarCraft 2 scene, he could probably bench press more than anyone.
What you doing?
Who the fuck is this? I'm in the middle of a video. Sorry about that. How long was that guy in there? What the fuck? Anyway, I am just blown away by the fact that he's gone. It's so terrible to hear. I mean, when I think about how many times I threw on those old State of the Game episodes, or the old Inside the Game episodes, or listen to the Pylon show, it just makes me fucking sick to think that he's gone. Now, I know I talked about the 4 pillars of the StarCraft 2 scene, and a lot of times I'll have video ideas, and I can't really flesh them out all the way, or I don't think they'll be popular, or people won't really fuck with them, so I don't make them. And I made a video called uh, Artosis, Starcraft's Prize, and that was sort of the precursor to the 4 Pillars of the StarCraft 2 scene video I was going to make. And I didn't make that video because I thought people would be butthurt with who I picked. But let me just sort of talk about why I think iNcontroL is so important. You have Day 9. He made over 900 Day 9 dailies, in-depth, hour-plus long videos that he had to do prep for, gather replays for, and he probably had more impact on helping people learn the game than anybody else. His Day 9 Daily 100 is probably like top 5 best StarCraft video ever. Then you have Artosis, a guy who devoted his entire life to the game and I'm such a mess, an incredibly intelligent and charismatic person who in many ways is what any StarCraft 2 player or commentator or person should aim to be. Artosis just has it all. He's so witty. He gave up everything to go live in Korea. He started the best StarCraft 1 American clan ever. He's a legend. And then Idra, my fucking favorite. The macro machine. A guy who moved to Korea when he was 18. His dad basically disowned him, and he was grinding macro games against B-teamers, doing everything he could just to try to fucking make A-team or get on Pro League and try to become a pro gamer. He's also incredibly funny and had a lot of tournament results. But then you go to iNcontroL. This is a guy who is like the ambassador of the scene. This is a guy who you look at his career arc, and he might not be the most winning player ever. You know, he had some success in Brood War and the WCG Pan American, where famously he lost to some Brazilian player who made like 16 zealots and ran him across the map. And as he said, that like broke my brain. But he qualified to get to the tournament. But what iNcontroL, as the game finishes, okay, so iNcontroL lost game 2 to Combat's Proxy Gates on Ohana. So it's 1-1. But you have to understand that in terms of making the game accessible to new players, and providing this sort of media service, pun intended, where he would act as sort of like a reporter or analyst on a lot of these talk shows and shed a lot of light on what was going on, and always do so in such a funny, relatable, charismatic way. That really helped the scene. I want you to think about what Inside the Game, State of the Game, The Pylon Show, and any other StarCraft show that he appeared on would have been like without him. It would have been way worse. And that's sort of why it's so difficult to lose iNcontroL. He was the face of the scene in many ways. Not only was he a good commentator, but he was really good at carrying the room, bringing up everyone in general, elevating the mood, being funny. These aren't traits that your average StarCraft pro gamer who grinds games for 8 hours a day has, okay? Like, let's just be honest. Like, iNcontroL was so charismatic and so talented that this was a huge asset for us to have in the Starcraft 2 scene. And look at Combat X trying to do a fucking behind the mineral line cannon rush. This is just classic. And iNcontroL gets a probe in there, which is great because then that allows you to easily defend against it. And Combat X is flummoxed here. God, I'm not going to have any snot left by the time this is over. But I know I'm repeating myself. Obviously, I'm distraught. And as E.B. Farnham would say, look at Combat X. Like, this motherfucker has no shame. He's going for a follow-up cannon rush. Oh my God. But I remember meeting iNcontroL at MLG Dallas. And he was such a fucking good guy. So nice, so down to earth. And whenever I think about iNcontroL, I think about all the funny videos that he did for EG. The extended series, which was basically like it was like a joke interview series where iNcontroL would ask his teammates like these sort of like leading questions that made him look bad, that like made his teammates look bad, but it was a joke, it was satire, it was really funny. The EG commercials that he was in, really funny. That classic gif where he's in the collared shirt and standing on the stairwell shaking his head, that was classic. One game, this is everything iNcontroL. I'm just gonna throw everything I have out, everything I have, okay? I remember one game on stream on Shakura's Plateau, Idra vs iNcontroL. I'm watching from Idra's point of view, being like a Gold League macro Zerg at the time, 2012. Early 2012. Shakura's, Idra's bottom left, iNcontrol's bottom right, and iNcontroL proxies his Twilight and his Darkshine in the top right of Shakura's Plateau. And right as the DTs are about to hit, Idra scouts it and makes detection and lives. But Idra would go on to win the game. It was a close, exciting macro game, but to me this just really shows iNcontroL understood how to win. You know, we saw his Twitter bio and it said expert in strategy games or something to that effect, and he really was. You want to know how to beat Idra? You hide shit around the map. How did Idra lose in the GSL where he was predicted to go to the finals? He beat a Protoss player in the first game, and then in the second game the Protoss player went 2 Stargate proxy, and in the third game, as Combat X's 4 fucking proxy gateways get scouted, typical Combat X. I remember a Combat X video where it was a PvP build order guide, and Combat X recommended you go Cannon Rush, and if that fails, you go 5 proxy Gate Zealot, and if that fails, you go double proxy Stargate, okay? And I love that Combat X not only made these ridiculous cheese guides, but actually abided by his own ridiculous principles. And it's just great to see that we see that even in iNcontrol's death, his games bring us great joy. I remember one of the first podcasts I ever heard iNcontroL on was the Starcast podcast. And if you're ever newly joining a game with a thriving scene, sometimes it can be hard to find like all the little nuggets of gold, all the stuff that you should be really listening to. Sometimes you just sort of like stumble upon a podcast that's not that good, and then from there you learn about the real good stuff that everyone watches. I didn't browse like our Starcraft at the time. I didn't even follow a lot of these guys on Twitter at the time, but there was this casual Starcraft podcast that I would listen to at my job when I was a teenager at a country club where I drove the little golf cart around that would pick up golf balls from the driving range. I would always listen to the Starcast podcast. And I remember iNcontroL was the guest on one of these Starcast podcasts. And this was a small show. These guys didn't get big guests, but iNcontroL was selfless enough to go on the show and do a killer job. And it was from there that I sort of realized, like, okay, I like this iNcontroL guy. Like, I'll check out what else he does. And then I discovered State of the Game and Inside the Game, and learned so much from iNcontroL and was entertained for so many hours after that. iNcontroL was such a good representative for EG. Whatever Alex Garfield was paying him, it should have been double. Because at that time, 2012, iNcontroL and the incredibly attractive Anna Prosser, who iNcontroL was high school sweethearts with, were frequently on these little bits that they would do together. Anna Prosser was sort of like the team mom. If you're not familiar, EG was like the biggest North American team at StarCraft 2's peak. They rented a house in Arizona called the EG Lair, in which Idra was streaming. If you've seen an Idra stream from Idra's Prime, it's from the EG Lair. You know, Stefano, Thorzane, Bryce Bates, iNcontroL, Bryce Bates' machine, like the nicest guy ever. They all spent time in the house, and like Idra, Machine, and iNcontroL lived there. Whereas Stefano and Thorzane were visiting to practice. But think about this. I want you to think about you're 18 years old, it's your dream scenario, and you have made friends with a lot of your clan mates that not only have you met in real life, but you're really close to. And there arises an opportunity where you can actually live with some of the people that you're closest to. That's what iNcontroL got to do. He got to live with his fiancée, Anna Prosser, who he would later marry, and Idra and Machine, two Zerg players that not only look alike, but were both kind-hearted, intelligent people who iNcontroL was part of the media clan with and was friends with. In many ways, this was sort of like a nerdy version of Entourage. iNcontroL got to live with his best friends, and basically, he was living the dream. And whether it be inside the game or his streams, iNcontroL really captured a very upbeat, excited feeling. What it was like to watch and be involved in the StarCraft 2 scene in its day, in its heyday. And he just contributed so much to the scene. And like I said, there's no script. This is all off the top. I'm feeling really emotional, so I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but iNcontroL, like, he's almost like Pete Rose in the fact that, like, Pete Rose is the all-time leader in at-bats and hits. iNcontroL is like the all-time leader in appearances and doing well. There's a reason he's a pillar of the scene without ever winning a tournament, a major tournament in StarCraft 2. Okay, like, you can't underestimate how much positive impact that this guy had. And I'm just really sad that he's gone. It's a fucking shame. And even to say that, like, yeah, it's a shame, like, it doesn't even feel like I'm doing it justice. Like, it sounds like I'm just parroting cliches, like, oh yeah, I'm sad he's gone. No, like, I'm fucking torn up about it. Like, it's terrible. I can't believe that we're never going to hear him cast again. The StarCraft 2 scene lost one of its pillars today. And it's a tragedy. Rest in peace, Jeff iNcontroL Robinson, American legend.